Travis, you mentioned that there were two social competencies, the first of which is social awareness. Tell me a little bit about that. What is it, and how does that show up?
Well, social awareness is really about understanding not just the emotions, but also the experience of the other person. Oftentimes, we can't even always determine exactly what their emotion is, and this is something that sort of holds people back. They say, well, I can't read what they're feeling, but you can read what they're going through, and you can always ask good questions. Social awareness requires that you focus on the other person more than you do on yourself. This is the biggest mistake that we see people make. They're always thinking, or I should say, because this is something that we all do, we're always thinking about what we're going to say next. That we're thinking about that good comeback or how this affects us, instead of really understanding what's going on with the other person. Given that social awareness is a foundational skill for managing relationships, you actually have to actively focus on the other person, what it is they're saying, their body language, how what they're talking about affects their history. And this is something that's actually quite difficult for a lot of people to do. It tends to be the biggest deficit area that we see. The lowest scores from most people are in social awareness.
That's really interesting. In a previous strategy session, we learned from Mickey Connolly that everybody shows up with purposes and concerns, their view of things. And what you're saying is if our awareness is higher around what their purposes are, what they're for, what their concerns are, which is usually what they're against, then we have a better chance of reading what their emotional state may be or what they may be feeling at any given time.
Yeah, and as a leader, this comes into play with your team a great deal. You know, when you feel like things aren't really in sync, or maybe you're having trouble retaining a key player, I'd really challenge you to ask yourself, am I really keyed into what's going on with this person? Am I really in the moment, day in, day out, when we're interacting, focusing more on them than I am on myself? Same thing with customers. A lot of times when organizations, you know, your sales force may be having trouble closing sales, are they focused more on the customer's needs than they are on their own need to sell? And people say, you know, they give lip service to this. They say, yeah, I'm doing this, but this specific skill, the elements of this skill, that actual focus, needs to come into play, and most people, they think they're doing it, but they're not.
Or maybe not doing it enough, even if they're doing it a little. It's probably one of those things that you can't do enough of.
Absolutely.
Well, what about when this doesn't go well, or someone's not proficient at this particular skill? How does that show up?
Well, then you get the proverbial bull in a china shop. You have someone who is really giving in to social blunders that everyone else is aware of, that they aren't. In a more subtle way, people feel they don't feel heard. And this happens a lot in leadership roles, where, you know, your team just doesn't quite feel connected to you and the organization in the way that they should. And often that comes down to feeling heard and understood. I mean, we all know the truth in business that people don't leave companies, they leave bosses. And people want a boss who is supportive. And it doesn't matter if they're your executive team, they still need a boss, they still need a supervisor, someone who understands them, who cares about their work. And as a leader, that's your job, regardless of where you are in the organization.
So what I'm hearing seems to be a real departure from the old management style of command and control, where it was thought that from the top we just tell people what to do. This sounds much more interactive.
Yeah, the command and control leadership mentality comes from the military, and I think it serves a great purpose in the military when you have these life and death interactions, and it needs to be a well-oiled machine where people follow orders without thinking. But in corporate America, it just doesn't work that way, and that mentality is certainly quite outdated. And if you think it works, I would really question you to look at the whole picture and see also where it isn't serving you well. I'm not saying it has no place, but it's certainly short-sighted.